question or comment you want to make it. Go ahead, please. Thanks.
I'll make this extremely brief. I wanted to recommend the book Native New Yorkers. There was a vast nation stretching all the way to the Rocky Mountains, all the way up above Canada, and down to North Carolina, the Algonquin Confederacy. And it's talked about in this book by a member of the Micmac Nation. They had different concepts of child rearing that are very much like what we're talking about today, and other aspects of their society. I think it's well worth any of us to find out about. The second thing I'd like to say is that I think there's an easy solution to overpopulation based on anyone's observations that when a society reaches a certain economic level, the birth rate goes down. The birth rate tends to be high in societies that are predominantly poor. So going by that simple observation, I think the answer would be to equalize wealth in the world.
The greater the societies that have less. The societies that have less disparity between wealth and poverty are also societies that have far less crime, far less lower birth rate. In fact, our friend Bjorn lives in a society like that where, though it's a capitalist society and there are lots of wealthy folks, the disparity between wealth and poverty is nowhere near what it is in the United States or in certain other countries. He has to take.
Most folks in this society are taxed.
They are indeed taxed. That's how the Social Democrats did Red Vienna. They had a very progressive tax system. The thing about the housing, I wanted to say, there was this wonderful point of view documentary about housing in New York City, done by one of the unions, and I think it was in Queens or the Bronx. That was very much like the Red Vienna housing, and that the structures still exist, but they're no longer occupied that way, but where there were meeting rooms and there were places for childcare and there were libraries, and it still exists somewhere. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? Well, that's true. But this was one of the
amalgamated houses.
That's the one I'm thinking.
Right. They were all of those union-run projects.
When Wright came to New York at that time, he was already far. There was advanced. He was on the front page of the Daily News at that time as an important, eminent arrival. He was welcomed by labor and socialists, even though by that time he had already been, on the hit list of the American CP. But the point is that he was New York was the New York intellectual community, which it was a red diaper baby, as I've said before. I grew out of that world. They were all incredibly sympathetic to the very ideas that Dr. Bennett has been presenting from Wright. Just quickly on the Algonquin, you have to keep in mind, however, that the Algonquin were destroyed by the Iroquois Confederacy, which was founded on principles very similar to American Confederation.
I would have thought they were destroyed by the invasion.
No, the Iroquois had already successfully, the Seven Nations had already successfully demolished them. Pretty much, they've been driven further and further away from. The Iroquois had moved down into Florida already, and were preparing an invasion of Mexico before the whites.
That's why I was talking about the Algonquin.
So we're taking a break, and then.
I guess.
Or am I going right?
I think we should take a.
Let me go. Move along. Let me go to what I wanted to do as my last presentation. But before I do that, let me just make a couple of comments that I wanted to, in deference to Dr. Bennett and Dr. Coley, who Dr. Bennett particularly has asked me sometimes to restrain myself from making comments so I made some notes, and since it's my time, I'll use it to make some notes, just because I think because I think they're worthwhile. All just adjunctive notes, really, that occurred to me as they were both speaking. But basically, the last comment on whether we would survive. And the issue really is that the answer for Reich finally was in the interest in self-regulation. And towards the end of his life, if you read through the letters with Neil and some of the interviews and personal writings and some of the journals, the hope and the increased hope in the raising of children, or the ability to raise healthy children, or really became more and more evolutionary in the sense of the hope was that each generation would produce children that were somewhat healthier, where one would not make the mistake of assuming that a mother and son were brother and sister, 50 years ago. Today, it's possible. I mean, I see that as a very. I see that.
I think that was delusion.
No, well, no. It might be delusional to you, being the mother, but as a parent, one might feel that that's not possible. But I think the perception. I think to me that I was struck by the perception. Not necessarily the reality that mothers and children often now have a very different, and that parents and children, not worldwide or universally, but that there's an increased difference in the nature of those kinds of relationships, even if it's only minutely so, and not necessarily in any way. Dr. Sobey, who, as I said, is often referred to here, once laughed at me when I was struggling over some issue with my daughter. We were struggling with some issue over our daughter, and I was really concerned how we had handled it and that we hadn't handled it right, and he started laughing, and I asked him what he was laughing about. He said, "Oh, I didn't understand. You were the one who thought you would get it right, as opposed to everybody else. That you can't." And the fact, but for Reich, I think the hope was, and he backed off of some of these kinds of aggressive programs like the ORIC and others, because the realization that to push ahead too rapidly winds up producing a kind of imposition of positions, or impositions of activities that often backfire. So that the hope was that to the degree that you increase the possibility of any living organism's ability to operate in a healthier way, to operate in a more self-regulating way in terms of trying to bring back the focus to self-regulation, you increase the possibility of that contact with the child, or with the offspring, or with children that you work with as a teacher, or as an educator, or as a therapist. You increase the potential for contactfulness and for a more resilient, a more lively organism. And as such, you produce, you make a contribution, it seems to me, in that way, towards building a society that has an increased capacity for love, work, and knowledge. Which I think, that was the other point I want to add, is that for Reich, I think what it really comes down to is that love, work, and, I mean, Dr. Bennett's examination of where and how this emerges and where the roots of this are is incredibly useful. I think in the final analysis for Reich, and my understanding of it, is that love, work, and knowledge literally equals a self-regulating system. And that kind of self-regulating system in which love, work, and knowledge are capable of governing or functioning will produce individuals who are increasingly capable of self-regulation, which will then increase the possibility, at least in theory, that societies will emerge, not as states, but as societies that are increasingly self-regulatory. Now, the issue of population size, when I said to Connie Carruthers about the Iroquois versus the Algonquin remained always small, very, very nuclear, very, very mobile, very rooted in nature. The Iroquois were state-oriented, very highly organized, very militaristic, very aggressive, very, very acquisitive, and believed in private property aggressively, as opposed to the Algonquin, who did not, in general.
That's why I talked about the Algonquins.
Yeah. But and interestingly, both they wound up being different linguistic groups. Algonquin, the Algonquin language is a very, very flexible, very. We would call, there are linguists who have done studies that show the Algonquin tongue is a very, very, for lack of a better word, democratic tongue. It has a lot of words for a lot of different things. The Iroquois speech patterns were extremely specific, extremely acquisitive, and extremely aggressive. So interesting. But that's it. So those are just my responses. The only other comment I want to say is you're sitting in a school in response to